Sorry, I'm just getting over COVID, so this is probably going to sound pretty hoarse. Just bear with me, please. Hey there, folks, and welcome back to another Let's Talk About video where I discuss, rant about, and sort of review video games. Today I wanted to talk about GRIME, since the new and free Colors of Rot DLC had come out, and since I'd already done a video discussing GRIME, I don't really want to rehash all of that, so please check out that video too if you're interested in GRIME. But today we're actually just going to focus and talk about the DLC content, so this won't be too long, but let's just dive in. GRIME was definitely my favorite metroidvania game that has come out in the past decade or so. Really can't recall another one I liked as much as this. So when the DLC got announced, I was super excited because I always wanted to play more GRIME since the game didn't really give you much of a reason to go back and do so, as there was no new game plus or boss rush or anything like that. So once you were done with it, that was kind of it. You could start it over if you wanted to, but yeah. And I was double thankful because the DLC isn't just like, oh hey, we added a new zone that's got some bosses and weapons in it. It's actually woven into the core game very well, and it fleshes out most of the areas, not just the ending and stuff. So going through with the new fresh save was actually well worth the experience. One of the biggest features that fans had requested was the ability to fast travel between monoliths sooner, since the base game you kind of get that power at the very end, which is kind of a waste. And the Colors of Rot DLC, one of the newer areas, about midway through the game, gives you access to the warp mechanic, which will let you backtrack and collect things much sooner. Because let's face it, if you played GRIME before, you knew that backtracking to the earlier parts of the game was such a slog that it really wasn't worth it. But now, with the faster warp, the more nerve-ending passages, and a sprint, yeah, sprint's new, it's actually much easier to get around and collect things and explore hidden areas. Colors of Rot also added tons of new hidden walls, areas, and bosses, and of course weapons, to all areas of the game, so exploration feels like a much bigger aspect than it did before, and that's great because there's a lot more time you can spend in the game now that it doesn't feel like a burden to actually go back. Now the bad side to this, especially because of all the new hidden areas, is that the map is still the same and it's hands down has to be the worst map I've ever seen in a game. Not only does it not tell you anything until you actually get the map beacon for the area that you're in, which is usually about halfway through the zone anyway, but it still only shows you the areas that you have been, and it doesn't actually connect any of the areas that are accessible via a hidden passage, so there's all these spots on the maps with just gaps, and you kind of have to remember where the areas are and how to get them. And just because you see borders doesn't mean you've actually, gone everywhere. It's just a mess. The map doesn't help you at all. I kind of hate it. And it's actually one of the few parts of the games that I actively dislike. It's still not a deal breaker by any means, it's just a glaring standout to a game that just feels so well done, just to have this god-awful map right next to it. It's just, ugh, hate the map, and I'm surprised they didn't change it in the DLC. Enough about the map though, let's talk about the weapons and stuff. This DLC added a dozen new weapons to the game, all around the maps. There's all sorts of different types of weapons, which are crazy now. We have bow type weapons, with different shot patterns and melee attacks. There are new scythes, there's new dot damaging weapons, weapons that scale off stamina or force, all sorts of new and interesting ideas that we really didn't have before. So it makes builds and choosing stats feel a lot more engaging, since I was always wanting to respec to try out a new weapon that I would find. Speaking of, weapons can actually be used completely without having stat investment. They just don't deal damage unless you actually meet the requirements, so you can't actually go around and play with them and test them out, and then if you actually like them you can go change your stats and stuff. It's a really nice quality of life change. Now to go with all the new weapons, there's also a bundle of new armors and praise skills that help cater to your playstyles. So yeah, there's just a lot more everything. Even I haven't found it all yet, there's just so much to discover. And there's a lot more that just helps you build certain playstyles and hyper focus into certain stats, which is really cool because I was kind of lacking before, and I love that kind of creativity and freedom in games like this. And of course, the bosses. While there wasn't any new endgame boss, which is kind of a shame, it's still Shidra, I did really enjoy the 3 new bosses that were added in the Colors of Rot DLC. Boss fights have always been my favorite part of GRIME because they always feel like an intricate dance with a lot of moving parts to manage. And I've never felt like I was cheated when I die. It always was clearly my fault and I could see what hit me. Now managing your stamina and watching the patterns is a huge part in GRIME. You can't just face smash your way through bosses, which I really enjoy. The Colors of Rot bosses continue this trend of just amazing encounter design, and it's one of the main reasons why GRIME will still be my favorite metroidvania game for a long time, I feel. It's really hard to nail that just really good feeling boss fight. You just don't get it a lot these days. A lot of bosses feel kind of like, plain, or just their elite enemies reskinned, or, they have like 3 different attacks, or you just kind of face roll them. And so it's like when you get ones like this that have, great background music and have a great fight, like it really elevates the game. The Colors of Rot also added a boss rush mode, so you can actually go back and refight any of the bosses you want, which is amazing because it's the best part of the game in my opinion. And I love this feature being added to more games, and I'm glad it's kind of like a trend, like DLCs tend to add this. Like, yeah, of course I could see why you would want it in base game, but just getting something a little extra like this is always nice. And of course, as I mentioned before, the music for all these boss fights are amazing, and I love a good OST in games. I have to say it every time, but a banger OST really makes the game pop. Metroidvania games also tend to have their platforming be a big part of the gameplay, and while GRIME definitely incorporates more platforming in the DLC, it's one of those features that I kinda wish they hadn't leaned into. The new floating mechanic they added for these puzzles is super janky and feels awful, since you can't change the direction of your pole while it's active, and it takes a second to recover from that float animation to do another action. So doing tight platforming becomes just a mess of janky interactions, and I can't describe it properly. But look, I liked platforming in GRIME, it was fun, but the new DLC areas are just some of the most awfully obnoxious sections I've actually seen, and I just don't like it because they force you to use this new float, which is just bad, and it doesn't solve the issue of not being able to look down when you fall and scout, so you have to often just eat deaths to scout ahead, which is just annoying. So yeah, wasn't a huge fan of the new platforming. But Colors of Rot also added more story, lore, and dialogue to help flesh out the world, which I thought was another nice touch. GRIME is a very abstract and surreal game when you're first introduced to it, but by the second or third playthrough I found myself connecting the dots and finally realizing what's going on and why. Story and lore isn't a huge part of the reasons why I play games or enjoy them, but it doesn't hurt to have something there just to chase down. It's definitely better than having an obnoxious main protag or bad dialogue though, right? I'll take having the more cryptic stuff over like a protag like Titus, right? But anyway, this is the GRIME DLC. It's free. I loved it, mostly because I already loved GRIME, and it was just an excellent way to weave in new content, which let me enjoy a brand new playthrough. I still do highly recommend everyone give it a try. I absolutely love GRIME. But that's going to be all for me. Thank you all for watching, and thank you for my Patreon members. Much appreciated. If anyone wants to talk shop about games, feel free to join the Discord down below. But thanks again, and peace.